And here we're back. Let's get ahead in the job game. Interviews, right? Polishing. What are employers looking for? Put yourself in the employer's shoes. Try to anticipate what it is they're looking for, right? They already know your skills and qualifications because you have a resume. Unless they're kind of a schlocky outfit where they don't pay attention, you know, and they don't do any kind of pre-information search and actually review your resume and your application, right? If you've been called in for an interview, though, it's likely, especially in higher, medium to high level jobs, that you've already met the basic requirements, otherwise you wouldn't be interviewed. So really think in terms of what are they looking for. And the employer's website, hey Penelope, the employer's website is something that you need to mine for information. What are the values? What is the strategy? What is the company involved in, right? So also make sure that there's a huge amount of the congruence between you on paper and you in person is tight, right? You don't want your resume, your cover letter, to be inconsistent with who you are and how you present yourself, right? And you want to demonstrate your fit to the environment. So think carefully, study carefully what the environment looks like to the extent you can, and dress appropriately, speak appropriately so that you look like you already fit in. Right? Identify any red flags or deal breakers, and man, stay away from those. You know, if they ask you, what do you like to do in the evening, and you say, well, you know, sometimes I just like to kick back and smoke a fatty, that's probably not going to go over too well in most occupations, right? It becomes a red flag or a deal breaker. So kind of anticipate what are things that would keep me out of the running, and let's not talk about those, right? For example, I spent 6 years from my, early 20s to about 30 as the range master of Angeles Shooting Ranges. That is the largest public shooting range in Los Angeles County. And I did that, you know, for 6 years. And later on, when I'm in college at University of California, Irvine, and I'm working on my personal statement to send to schools to become a graduate student, I remember my advisor, Dr. Ditto, said, Mark, I said, yeah, Pete. And he said, you know, I'm reading the draft of your personal statement. He says, I like it. It's solid. I mean, it's well written. I think you've made your case, you know, to get into graduate school. But he said there's this, you talk about your history, which we felt was important, but there's this gap from about 23 to 30. It's like you didn't exist. And I said, well, Pete, and you know, I said, Pete, I was a range master at a shooting range for those 6 years. And he said, okay, so you're going to not mention that. You're just going to keep that out of that, right? You're going to keep that out of here. And I said, yeah, I thought it'd be best. And he said, you know, social psychologists tend to be very liberal, and people who are very liberal often have a strong anti-gun bias, and that's about the last thing that you want to say to your these people, that you did this, right? That would be a red flag or perhaps a deal breaker. And it's good or bad, that's not what I'm talking about. Values I'm not talking about here. I'm talking about the reality that if I had, you know, talked about that experience, and I did learn a lot about people, no two ways about it, and I learned a lot about designing systems that were safe. Yeah, hugely important in the development of me, but definitely a deal breaker in the context of, let's say, trying to get into a psychology program. Right? Now, if I was trying to get a job at a gun store, that would be freaking awesome. But so identify what probably is good, what's consistent, but also what's a deal breaker. Right? Now, interviews, polish your interviewing technique, understand how to dress business formal. Right? If you overdress a little bit, it's probably not going to be a bad thing. Realize that take care of your appearance, right? Comb your hair. I'm one to talk, right? Make sure you're shaved. Again, I'm one to talk, right? But I feel comfortable with you guys, so I can kind of let some of it hang out at least. People who are well dressed and who are thin tend to get higher ratings. People who are attractive tend to get higher ratings, and it's tied to the halo effect, right? What is beautiful is good. People demonstrate an attractiveness bias. There's little that we can do to get around that. Now, in personnel psychology, it's an idea we explore how can we do blind interviews where appearance would not be part of the interview process, right? But ultimately, those are things you can't change. What you can change, though, is be confident, be enthusiastic, and be ambitious. And polish your interview technique so that you're presenting those qualities, right? One of my pet tricks is let the interviewer talk as much as possible. And this is, some of you maybe for your self-help book read Dale Carnegie. Is that right? Yeah, the Dale Carnegie book. People love to talk about themselves. So in interview technique, and I've had a lot of interviews, one interview technique I use is I try to turn the conversation around so I'm asking them questions about themselves. And there's a finite amount of time for an interview, right? So to the extent that I've said what I need to say about myself, then it's time to maybe get them to talk about themselves. And what's going to happen is they're going to like you more, and they're going to feel better about the interview because they enjoyed talking about themselves, right? And it's less time for you to mess up. I'm not saying you're going to mess up, but there's always that potential. So letting the interview talk as much as possible never hurts, right? Have questions going in. Interviewee without question convey disinterest. So, and that's almost always, do you have any questions? Well, the interview's gone pretty well. Do you have any questions for me? And you better have 3 questions lined up. I see that you're opening a new business in such and such, and I was wondering what opportunities you think will be afforded in that area. And if you can say something like that, they're going, wow, this is my person. I'm hiring them, right? So the importance of mimicking or mirroring nonverbals, and that is, came to us from Tanya Chartrand and John Barge, that is that people feel more comfortable when their behaviors are being mimicked to a certain extent. It's called non-conscious mimicry. Right? So if the person is somewhat open and expansive, then adopt that same posture. Right? So try to look at the posture, look at the body language, and imitate some of it to a certain extent. But don't get distracted by trying to figure all that shit out online. Most of us do it naturally, do it non-consciously anyway, but it can be an effective help. So that is, if someone leans forward demonstrating interest, then it's okay to lean forward and demonstrate a little interest as well. If they're talking about something that interests them and their tone raises a little bit and they get a little louder, it's okay to do the same, right, about what they're saying. So, things to know: who's the name of the interviewer, their background if you can get it, right, especially if this person's going to be your supervisor. Say, what is it like being a tech rep? Right? When I go to meet Chuck Remsing for the first time at the paper mill and they want me to be the replacement tech rep potentially, right, when Chuck retires, then I got a lot of questions for, what is it like being a tech rep? Do you travel a lot? How do you diffuse a situation where you're walking into angry customers, right? And show this tremendous knowledge about what they do. It shows respect, it shows interest, right? Know the mission statement or the goals of the organization, right? And be prepared to ask about that if you so choose. And this is why you look at the websites. A good reason why you would fit into their organization is something you should be able to supply. I think I'm a good fit because you stress, that making decisions by using data and research, and I have a strong background in that. So know as much about them as you possibly can. Things to avoid: racy humor, don't go there, right? If you got an off-color joke that you think is an icebreaker, I think save it for another time, right? Too much cologne or perfume? No. Be very subtle about it. You don't want to blow people away. And notice that some people are allergic, and some people might not like your brand or your style or whatever. So keep it at a very minimum, right, if at all. And that's not to say ignore personal hygiene. Right, soap in a shower is a good way to go, but slather on the perfume or cologne is probably not. Right. Any negativity I would leave outside the door. If they ask you about your past employment, then stress the things you liked. Right. And if you got to go negative, say the one thing I didn't like about working at Columbus State. One thing that I could say safely, if you say, well, why do you want to come, why do you want to continue at Ohio State? And I would say, I get to teach a variety of classes, and that's really important to me. Over the semester, I teach 8 sections, 7 different classes across 8 sections. I only have one repeat, and that's Psych of Emotion. I found it difficult at Columbus State to teach 5 sections of Psych 1100 every semester. I just prefer variety. Notice I'm stating my preference, but I'm not doing it in a way that exudes negativity, right? And the salary discussion, I would stay the hell away from that. That's something that you negotiate after the hiring process, right? So do that at that point. And of course, one way to get a leg up on this is look at it from the other end, is take personnel psych. So here's my advertisement: take personnel psych in the spring, right? Because we're going to learn about assessments, interviews, and you can shine through as a top candidate because you'll already be partly educated in the process of personnel selection, right? And it's offered every spring for academic enjoyment. I'm saying it should be offered in the autumn too, but the people who need to hear that aren't listening to this lecture, I guarantee you. Sexual harassment. Okay? Now, it's a form of sex discrimination, and it violates Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of '64. Yes, it goes way back that far, right? It applies to employers with 15 or more employees. It also applies to employment agencies and labor organizations as well as the federal government. What is sexual harassment, right? Well, unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, other verbal or physical conduct of any sexual nature constitutes sexual harassment when the conduct is explicitly or implicitly affects an individual's employment. It unreasonably interferes with an individual's work performance or creates intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment, right? Any of those qualities. So it's a relatively broad definition. Okay? So from the EEOC, the Equal Opportunity Occupation Commission, right? The victim as well the harasser can be woman or man. It can go either way. That doesn't matter. The victim doesn't have to be of the opposite sex for it to be harassment. The harasser can be the victim's supervisor, an agent of the employer, a supervisor in an area, a coworker, even a non-employee, if you will. And sometimes that applies to customers. Right? The victim doesn't have to be the person harassed, but could be anyone affected by the offensive conduct. So it could be something that you're continually exposed to that makes you uncomfortable in the workplace. Unlawful sexual harassment may occur without economic injury or without discharge of the victim. Right? So the harasser's conduct, this is the core, must be unwelcome, and they must be made to know that it is unwelcome. So what happens then? Well, in 2016, the EEOC estimated that between 25 and 85% of women have experienced sexual harassment at work. And you say 25 to 85%. Got that shit narrowed down, huh? Because of kind of the broad nature of the definition and people's willingness to admit to it or not, right, or report it or not, the statistics got a little bit of variability in it. Now, but there's a lot of other surveys, so let's look at 2 others at least. Nearly half, 48% of employed American women have reportedly experienced either sexual, verbal, or physical harassment at work. And this is from an NBC Wall Street Journal poll, right? And the Quinnipiac University found that 60% of U.S. women, 20% of men have been sexually harassed. The prevalence is high, right? Far higher than is justified in any stretch of the imagination. What do you do if you're harassed? Well, if you feel comfortable doing so, right, and this is from the EEOC, and you can check out the link there, tell the person who's harassing you to stop. Say, hey, look, I don't appreciate it. Please don't do that. And if you do not feel comfortable confronting the harasser, which maybe it's hard to say that, right, directly, or if you've confronted the harasser and they haven't stopped, then follow the steps below. And there's more to this on the website, so if you're, experiencing this, check it out. Check to see if your employer has an anti-harassment policy. If there is a policy, follow the steps in the policy, see who you need to contact and what you need to contact them about. If there's no policy, talk with a supervisor. Right? And we had a case of sexual harassment at Columbus State. It was weird. Psychology, we had a hell of a time finding a compatible department chair. And one thing I will say about Columbus State is we in the department had a strong voice in who to hire as a chair. And we hired a guy, and we did not do our due diligence. We did a horrible job of hiring. The person was unqualified, and we could have figured that out beforehand. We just didn't know enough or cared enough to do it. But then also, the person we hired, he was very sexist. He was very misogynistic, and he would dismiss the suggestions of female professors in the department just out of hand, but then would listen to the men, and it just became wearing on the women and just angering them more and more. And they, reported him to the Human Resources Department, which was the appropriate channel, but it wasn't gaining any traction. Nothing was really happening. And it was funny because I hate harassment. I mean, I watched this happen to my mom as I was a boy growing up, how she could be mistreated in certain contexts. And eventually, I became kind of one of the preliminary witnesses to his harassment, and spent a lot of time talking to Human Resources. And I know it's oh so stupid, guys, but somehow with Human Resources, the word of a man that another man was engaged in this misogynistic, harassing behavior carried more weight than the voices of the women. And that's really indicative of kind of how culture works, right? But we locked arms and we moved forward, and eventually we got rid of the guy. That was just bad news for all of us. So, what do you do if you're harassed at Ohio State? Well, go to this website. Go to the Title IX, Title IX OSU. And if you've been a victim of sexual assault, sexual harassment, domestic or dating violence, stalking, sex-based discrimination, pregnancy discrimination, the Title IX area is there to help you, right? So you go to the website, and as part of what can you expect to happen? Well, you can expect the Title IX office to have your back, and you can expect them to work hard for you, right? And that includes many of us. I'm a mandated reporter, and I will have your back. I will stand by you if you've experienced this, right? So there's a lot of support available to students at Ohio State. As the part of the Buckeyes Act commitment, Ohio State will respond promptly and effectively to sexual assault, racial relationship violence, and stalking. Right? They'll provide supportive measures as necessary, provide confidential, non-conventional support resources depending on your choice, provide a prompt, fair, impartial, equitable investigation process, and provide remedies as appropriate. So we don't have to endure this anymore. We need to speak up as we feel comfortable. We need to avail ourselves of the resources, and we need to start diminishing the prevalence of sexual harassment. Right? And this is kind of an operant conditioning. If someone harasses and then is somehow rewarded or just ignored for their behavior, then it's likely to continue. We know that from operant conditioning. We've been there, we've done that lecture. But if we can begin to apply meaningful consequences to harasser behavior, maybe we can start to see it diminish. Right? There's no reason that people have to go to work and they have to endure harassing behavior. It's just not part of the job, and it's not useful. And that's all I got for you guys. So you saw your homework assignment in there, and we're getting towards the end of the course. We've only got one more video lecture coming up. I better get busy and write that one because it's a brand new one. It's going to be about creativity. And so I'm going to leave you with that. This is it. You guys have a great day, and the path got completed. So, wow. During this lecture, we started with a path that was largely undone, and there it is. It's finished, pretty much. So, you guys have a great day, and remember, work can be tremendously gratifying, and maybe that's something I didn't say in this lecture, but it can be tremendously gratifying, and it can provide us challenges and can really do a lot to elevate our self-concept. So, let's be mindful about our choices regarding career, regarding work, and what we do when we're looking for work. You guys have a great day. Bye.